Before I tell you what happened at the edge of that frozen parking lot, I need you to understand something. I have buried 3 horses in my life. I have pulled a calf out of a dying cow at 2 in the morning with my bare hands. I thought I had run out of ways to be surprised by another living thing. I was wrong. Because on the coldest night of that January, a woman I had never met knocked on the window of my truck with a knuckle so raw it left a smear of blood on the glass. And behind her, half hidden in the dark, was a little girl clutching a plastic bag like it was the last thing on earth that belonged to her. And the only reason I stopped, the only reason I rolled that window down instead of driving past like every other set of headlights that night, was because of a donkey named Biscuit who would not, for love or money, take one more step toward home. If you have ever felt like the world had quietly decided you were not worth stopping for, stay with me. This one is for you. My name is Delbert Hayes, though everybody within 40 miles of the ranch just calls me Del, and the ones who don't like me call me worse than that. I'm 61 years old. I keep a little spiral notebook in my breast pocket, the kind you buy 3 for $1 at the feed store, and I write down things I don't want to forget. Weather, which fence post is rotting. The exact words my wife said the morning before she stopped being able to say much of anything. It's a stupid habit. My son tells me it's a stupid habit. I keep doing it anyway. That January, the cold came down out of the mountains like it had a personal grudge. Not the pretty kind of cold, the postcard kind. The kind that makes the metal of a gate handle bite through your glove and take a little of your skin with it when you let go. The kind that kills the weak things quietly, overnight, so you find them in the morning stiff in the corners of the barn, and you tell yourself there was nothing you could have done. I'd driven into town for grain, and for a prescription I kept forgetting to pick up, and I'd stopped at the gas station on the highway because Biscuit needed water, and I keep a bucket in the truck bed for exactly that reason. People stare when they see a donkey in a stock trailer at a gas station. Let them stare. Biscuit is old and stubborn and mine, and where I go he goes, mostly because the last time I left him home alone for a day, he chewed through a board and let 3 goats loose into the county road. So there I was, 40 minutes past dark, standing at the tailgate with a bucket in my hand, when Biscuit did the thing. I need to explain about the thing because it matters. Biscuit has, in 11 years, made a particular sound exactly 4 times. It is not a bray. It's lower than that, a kind of groan that rattles up from somewhere in his chest, and every single time he's made it, something has been about to go wrong that I couldn't see yet. He made it the morning the barn caught. He made it the night the coyotes came for the kid goats. My wife used to say that donkey had a wire running straight from God into his ribs, and she wasn't a religious woman, so that was saying something. He made it that night, standing stock still in the trailer, ears swiveled hard toward the dark edge of the lot where the light from the station gave out, staring at something I couldn't make out. I looked. I didn't see anything at first, just the shape of a car parked way out past the pumps where the asphalt turned to gravel, the kind of place you park when you don't want anybody to notice you're parked at all. An old sedan, silver going to gray, one headlight dark, frost already crawling up the windows. And then the window moved, just a little, fogged from the inside, which meant something in there was breathing. Now I want to be honest with you, because I promised myself I'd be honest when I finally wrote this down. My first thought was not compassion. My first thought was that I was tired, my hip hurt, the prescription was riding shotgun in a white paper bag, and I wanted to be home in front of the stove. My first thought was that whatever was in that car was not my problem, and Lord knows I had enough problems of my own crowding the passenger seat. I had actually turned to hoist the bucket back into the bed when Biscuit made the sound again, louder, and he stamped once hard enough that the whole trailer rocked. "All right," I said out loud to a donkey in an empty parking lot. "All right, you old fool, all right." I walked out toward the sedan with my hands where they could be seen, the way you learn to do when you've spent a life around skittish animals and skittish people, which in my experience are not so different. 10 feet out, I could see there were two shapes inside. 15 feet out, I could see one of them was small. I knocked on the glass with one knuckle gentle. "Ma'am, you okay in there?" Nothing. Then movement, quick and scared, and the driver's window came down maybe 2 inches, and a woman's face appeared in the gap. Late 20s maybe. Hard to tell, because she had that pinched, hollowed look that cold and hunger and fear give a person, the look that ages you 10 years in a week. Her lips were nearly the same color as her skin, and she looked at me with an expression I have seen exactly once before, on a dog that had been kicked so many times it flinched when you reached out to feed it. "We're fine," she said, her voice shook, and not just from the cold. "We're just resting, we'll move along." "Ma'am, it's 9 degrees out here." "We're fine." And behind her from the back seat, a small voice said, "Mama, is that man a cowboy?" I saw the woman close her eyes for just a second, the way you do when a child says the exact wrong thing at the exact wrong time, when they hand a stranger a piece of your heart you were trying to keep hidden. Then she opened them and her jaw set, and I understood in that moment that whatever this woman was, she was not weak. She was a wall with a scared child behind it, and she had put herself between that child and the entire cold world, and she was about ready to fight me if I made her. "He sure is," I said before she could answer, because the little one had asked, and it seemed cruel to say no to something so small when so many other things had probably already said no to her. "And that back there," I nodded toward the trailer, "is my donkey. His name is Biscuit, and he's the reason I came over here. He wouldn't let me leave." The car was silent. Then the back door cracked open just an inch and one eye appeared in the gap. A girl. 6, maybe 7, dark hair that hadn't been brushed in a while, and on her face, cutting straight through all that fear, was the one thing in the whole scene that nearly broke me. Wonder, pure, uncomplicated wonder. A real cowboy, a real donkey. In a world that had apparently taken everything else from this kid, she still had that. "A donkey," she whispered. "His name's Biscuit," I said again. "Because when he was little he was the color of a biscuit and about as soft. You want to meet him?" "Sweetheart, no." The mother's hand shot back, found the girl's shoulder. We don't bother strangers." "He's not a stranger," the girl said with the flawless logic of a child. "He has a donkey." I laughed. I couldn't help it. And I saw something happen in the mother's face, a crack, a hairline fracture in that wall. Because when your kid laughs or almost laughs, when there's a chance of joy in a place you thought joy had abandoned, it does something to you that fear can't undo. I want to slow down here, because this is the part where I made my decision, and I've turned it over enough nights since to know it was the hinge everything else swung on. I could have called somebody. That's what you're supposed to do. There's a number, there's a shelter 40 minutes off, there are systems. And I know all about the systems because I've watched them fail people I loved. And it was cold, and it was late, and I am an old man who lives alone with a donkey and a stack of unpaid vet bills, and a wife in a facility whose name I can't say without my throat closing up. But I looked at that woman's raw knuckles wrapped around the top of her window, and I looked at the frost climbing up the inside of the glass, and I did the math a rancher does automatically, the math of what lives through the night and what doesn't. And that math said, not like this, not with the child. "Ma'am," I said, careful, quiet, "I'm not gonna ask you anything. I'm not gonna tell anybody anything. I've got a place about half an hour up the road. It's not much. It's a ranch house and a wood stove and a spare room that's got my son's old bed in it that nobody's slept in for 6 years. There's no strings. You can lock the door from the inside. You can leave at first light and I'll never see you again, and that's fine. But I am not going to drive home tonight and lie in my bed knowing there's a little girl freezing in a parking lot, because I'd never sleep again, and I don't sleep good as it is." She stared at me, and I watched about 4 different lifetimes of hurt move across her face, watched her weigh me the way you weigh a stranger when strangers have not, historically, been kind to you. I don't know what she'd been running from. I found some of it out later, and some of it I never did, and some of it I'm glad I never did. But right then all I knew was that she was measuring me against every man who had ever lied to her, and the odds were not in my favor. "Why?" she said finally, not a question so much as a challenge. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." And I didn't have a good answer. I still don't, if I'm honest. So I told her the truth. "Because my donkey wouldn't let me leave," I said, "and in 11 years he's never once been wrong." It was the wrong thing to say and the right thing to say. She let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and I stood there in the cold and didn't reach out because I could see she wasn't a woman you reached out to yet. "His name's really Biscuit?" she asked, muffled. "Ask him yourself. He'll tell you it's a stupid name. He's very dignified about it." The little girl was fully out of the car now, hopping from foot to foot in shoes that were canvas, in January, and that detail alone told me more about their situation than any story could have. Canvas shoes. No socks that I could see. And she was walking straight for the trailer with the fearlessness of somebody too young to have learned to be afraid of the right things. "Emmy," the woman said sharply. "Emmy, wait." But Biscuit had already put his big gray head over the trailer rail, and Emmy had stopped dead about 3 feet away, suddenly shy, and the two of them looked at each other, the ancient patient donkey and the small cold child, and Biscuit lowered his head down to her level slow, the way he does with the lambs, and blew a warm breath across her face. Emmy giggled. It was the smallest sound. It came out of her like something that had been trapped a long time. And I watched the mother's wall come down. Not all at once, but I watched it come down, brick by brick, because there is no fortress on earth that can hold against the sound of your own child laughing when you'd started to think you'd never hear it again. "His whiskers tickle," Emmy announced, delighted, reaching up to touch Biscuit's soft nose. And the donkey stood there and let her, patient as a mountain, and I thought, not for the first time, that there is more decency in that animal than in half the men I've known. The woman got out of the car, slow, stiff, hugging herself. She was tall, taller than I'd expected, and thin in a way that wasn't natural, and she stood there watching her daughter pet my donkey with an expression I'll carry to my grave. Relief and terror and exhaustion, and something underneath all of it that I can only call grief. The grief of a person who has been carrying a weight so long they've forgotten what their own hands feel like empty. "I'm Dell," I said. "Marlene," she said. After a pause you could have driven the trailer through. Like her name was the first thing she'd given anybody in a long time, and she wasn't sure she wanted it back. "Marlene," I said, "you and Emmy hungry?" She didn't answer, but her eyes did. God, her eyes did. We stood in that parking lot a while longer than we needed to, because I could tell she needed the time, needed to watch me be a harmless old man in the fluorescent light before she committed to being in a truck with me on a dark road. I let her have it. I checked Biscuit's water. I made a show of being slow and boring and predictable, no sudden moves, the way you gentle a horse that's decided the whole species can't be trusted. And while I did, Emmy talked. Lord, that child could talk once she started. She told me Biscuit was the best donkey in the world. She told me she'd never seen a real donkey, only in a book, and the book donkey was brown but Biscuit was gray and gray was better. She told me she was almost 7. She told me they'd been in the car for, and here Marlene said, sharp, "Emmy," and the girl went quiet, and I understood there were things I wasn't supposed to know. And I filed that little silence away in the notebook of my head where I keep the things that matter. "You know," I said to Emmy, real casual, not looking at her mother, "Biscuit gets awful lonesome in that trailer by himself on the drive home. He likes it when somebody talks to him. You think you could ride up front with me and your mama and tell him about it out the window?" It was a bribe. It was a bald, shameless bribe, and Marlene knew it. And I looked up and met her eyes and let her see that I knew she knew, and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise, and that she could say no. She looked at Emmy. Emmy was already vibrating with hope, the way kids do, the way that hope hasn't been beaten out of yet. Just for tonight, Marlene said, to me but really to herself. Just tonight, and I'm sitting by the door. Sit wherever makes you comfortable, I said. There's no wrong seat in my truck. The drive home is 31 minutes. I know because I've driven it 10,000 times in daylight and dark, drunk once, grieving more times than that. But I have never driven it the way I drove it that night, at 40 miles an hour with the heater cranked all the way up. A stranger pressed against the passenger door with her hand on the latch the whole way like she might need to bail, and a small girl in the middle seat with her window cracked 2 inches so she could shout back at a donkey in the trailer. "Biscuit," she'd holler, "Biscuit, we're going to a ranch." And I swear to you that donkey brayed back every time, and every time he did, Emmy dissolved into laughter, and every time she laughed, I saw Marlene's grip on the door latch loosen just a little more. About halfway home in the dark, over the sound of the heater and the tires and the occasional bray, Marlene spoke, quiet, not looking at me, looking out at the black shapes of the mountains going by. "I had a job," she said, just like that, out of nowhere. "I want you to know that. I had a job in an apartment and I was doing everything right. I want you to know I'm not, that this isn't." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "Things fell apart real fast, faster than you'd think. Once it starts falling, it goes so fast." "I know it does," I said, and I did. God help me, I did. "I don't need charity," she said, and there was steel in it, and I respected the steel. "I can work, I'm strong. Whatever you got that needs doing on that ranch, I'll do it. I don't care what it is, I don't care how cold, I just need." Her voice cracked and she pressed her lips together hard and she got it back under control through what looked like sheer will. "I just need Emmy to be warm for one night. That's all I'm asking. One warm night and I'll figure out the rest. And here is the thing I have never told anybody. The thing I'm only writing now because I'm old and it doesn't cost me anything anymore to be soft." When she said that, "One warm night for my daughter and I'll figure out the rest," I had to grip the wheel and stare at the road and blink hard because it put me back 6 years, to a hospital hallway, to my own voice saying almost the same words to a doctor. "Just let her be comfortable. Just one more good day. I'll figure out the rest." You don't ever figure out the rest. You just keep going anyway. And you help who you can when the helping falls into your lap, because somewhere along the line somebody helped you or didn't, and either way you know exactly how much it matters. "There's plenty needs doing on the ranch," I said when I could talk again. "More than one old man can do, but that's a conversation for daylight. Tonight you just get warm." She nodded. She didn't say thank you. I understood why. Thank you was too small, and also thank you was a debt, and she had spent a long time learning that debts to strangers came due in ways you couldn't afford. So she just nodded and turned back to the window, and I let her have the silence, because silence is a gift you can give a person who's talked out their whole self just to explain why they're not a bad person for needing help. The ranch came up out of the dark the way it always does, the porch light I leave on for no reason any more glowing yellow at the end of the drive. Emmy pressed her face to the windshield and breathed, "Is that your house?" Like I'd told her we were pulling up to a castle, and I suppose to a kid who'd been living in a silver sedan. A drafty old ranch house with a sagging porch and a wood stove might as well have been. I parked. I got Biscuit settled first. Because that's the rule. The animals eat before you do and they sleep warm before you do, and I could feel Marlene watching me do it, watching how I was with the animal when I didn't think it counted, and I knew she was still measuring me. I let her measure. A man who's kind to his donkey when nobody's gratting him is a man you can maybe, provisionally, trust with your child for one night. That's the calculation. I'd have made the same one. Inside, I lit the stove, and I heated up a pot of the beef stew I'd made 3 days back and had been eating on ever since, and I watched a woman and a little girl eat like I have not watched anybody eat in a long, long time. Marlene tried to be polite about it. She tried to go slow. She couldn't. And Emmy didn't try at all, just ate with the total focus of a child who has been hungry. And I kept the bowls full and I kept my mouth shut, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt since the house went quiet. Something warm and painful, like blood coming back into a limb that's been asleep. When Emmy finally slowed down, sagging in her chair with a milk mustache and eyelids at half-mast, she looked up at me and said, so serious, "Del, can Biscuit come inside?" "Biscuit," I said gravely, "is a barn donkey. He'd be very embarrassed to come inside, but I'll tell you what. In the morning, if your mama says it's all right, you can help me give him his breakfast. Donkeys like their breakfast better when a kid does it. Everybody knows that." "Is that true?" she asked wide-eyed. "It's the truest thing I know," I lied. And it wasn't a lie at all, because I decided in that moment I'd make it true. Marlene got Emmy to bed in my son's old room, and I heard the low murmur of her voice through the wall, and I heard the door lock click, and I sat by the stove a long time after that, not sleeping, just sitting, an old spiral notebook open on my knee and a pen in my hand and nothing written yet, because I didn't have the words for what had happened. Somewhere past midnight, the bedroom door opened. Marlene came out in the dark, wrapped in the extra blanket I'd left folded on the couch, and she stood in the doorway to the front room looking at me sitting there by the fire. "She's asleep," Marlene said. "First time in," she stopped. "First time in a while she went right to sleep." "Good," I said. "That's good." Marlene came and sat on the far end of the couch, as far from me as she could get and still be in the same room, and she pulled her knees up under the blanket and stared into the stove. "I'm not going to sleep," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm going to sit right here all night with my eyes open. I'm not saying I don't think you're," she shook her head, frustrated with herself. "I just can't. I can't let my guard down. I haven't been able to for a long time and I don't know how to anymore." "You don't have to explain it to me," I said. "You sit up as long as you need to. I'm usually up half the night anyhow. I'll put more wood on and we'll just be awake together. That all right?" She looked at me for a long moment across the length of that couch, this woman who trusted nobody, who had every reason not to, and something in her face shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first faint outline of a thing she'd thought she'd lost. "That's all right," she said quietly. And so we sat, and the fire cracked, and out in the barn, in the dark, an old gray donkey stood over the warm, sleeping shape of a place that had, without any of us deciding it out loud, become something more than a spare room and a spare stall and a spare seat at a table. I didn't write anything in the notebook that night. I closed it and put it back in my pocket. Some things you don't have to write down to keep. But I remember thinking, as the fire burned low and the stranger on the far end of my couch finally, despite herself, began to nod, that Biscuit had been right again. He'd never once been wrong. And whatever was coming next, and something was coming, I could feel it the way you feel weather changing in an old wound. We were, at least, going to face it warm. What I didn't know yet, sitting there by that stove with a fresh log catching and a stranger asleep against her will and my own eyes finally getting heavy, was that the parking lot had been the easy part. The parking lot had been the miracle. What came after the miracle? The daylight, the questions, the man in the silver truck who came looking 3 weeks later, and the choice I'd have to make that I still don't know if I made right. That was going to be the hard part. Before I let the fire go out that night, I did one more thing, and I've never told a soul about it until now. I went out to the barn in the cold with a flashlight, and I stood in front of Biscuit's stall, and I put my hand on that old gray muzzle, and I said, out loud like a fool, "You did good tonight. You did real good." And that donkey leaned his big heavy head into my chest the way he does maybe twice a year. And we stood there, the two of us, an old man and an older animal, in the dark and the cold. And I thought about my wife saying he had a wire running straight from God into his ribs. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't sure she'd been joking. Because here's what I keep coming back to. There were 100 cars at that gas station over the course of that night. 100 sets of headlights that swung across that silver sedan and kept right on going. Not because those were bad people. Because they were tired people, cold people, people with their own bags in the passenger seat, people who'd learned the hard lesson that you can't stop for everybody or you'll never make it home yourself. I was one of those people. I was fixing to be exactly one of those people. And the only thing that stood between Marlene and Emmy and one more night of frost climbing up the inside of the glass was an animal who couldn't explain what he sensed and wouldn't take one more step until I listened. I've thought a lot about how thin that is. How the whole rest of this story, everything that came after, all of it, hung on the stubbornness of a donkey and the fact that I was too tired to argue with him. Grace comes in strange shapes. Sometimes it comes with long ears and a bad attitude about being left alone. So that's how they came to the ranch. A woman who'd been taught the whole world was a closed door, a little girl in canvas shoes who still believed in cowboys, and an old man who'd stopped believing in much of anything. But that's the next part of the story, and it's a longer one, because the man in the silver truck was already looking for them. And when he found the ranch, I was going to have to decide, standing on my own porch in the cold, exactly what kind of man I was willing to be. 3 weeks. That's how long it took my house to stop being a place where a widower waited to die and start being a home again. I didn't notice it happening, which is the thing about that kind of change. It never announces itself. You just wake up one morning and there's a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator. A lopsided crayon donkey with legs like fence posts, and a son in the corner with a smiling face. And you stand there in your socks with your coffee going cold in your hand, because you can't remember the last time anything got taped to that refrigerator. And you have to go outside and pretend the cold made your eyes water. Marlene worked. Lord, that woman worked. She'd said she would and she meant it, and it turned out she wasn't lying about being strong. The first morning, before I'd even got my boots on, I found her out in the frozen yard trying to figure out the wood splitter, and when I told her she didn't have to do that, she looked at me with that hard, flat look and said, "I'm not staying here for free. Don't ask me to." That's the one thing I won't do, and I understood that her pride was the last thing she had left standing, and I had no business knocking it over. So I taught her to split wood, and to muck a stall, and to check a water line for ice. And she learned all of it fast and did all of it without complaint, and by the end of the first week the ranch was in better shape than it had been since my wife got sick. But it was Emmy who did the real work, though she never knew it. Emmy did the work on me. That child attached herself to Biscuit like they'd been separated at birth and finally reunited. Every morning she was out at the barn before the sun cleared the ridge, and every morning that old donkey was waiting at the rail for her, and I'd watch from the kitchen window as a 6-year-old told a donkey everything, her whole small heart, out loud into those long, patient ears. Things she wouldn't say to me or her mother. I heard pieces of it. I heard her tell Biscuit she used to have a room with stars on the ceiling. I heard her tell Biscuit she wasn't scared of the dark anymore because Biscuit was strong. I heard her ask Biscuit, one gray morning when she didn't know I was close, whether they were going to have to leave, because they always had to leave, and she didn't want to leave this time. And I stood on the other side of the barn wall with a bucket in my hand, and I didn't breathe, because that was the first I'd heard from anybody that anybody wanted to stay. I hadn't asked them to stay. You have to understand that. It wasn't my place. Every few days Marlene would say something about moving on, about a plan, about a cousin 2 states over who might or might not have a couch. And I'd nod and say sure, whenever you're ready, no rush, and she'd nod back. And neither of us would mention that she hadn't made a single phone call to that cousin, that the plan never got any more solid than the word plan. That Emmy's drawings kept accumulating on my refrigerator like the whole thing was already decided by everybody, except the 2 grown-ups too scared to say it. I'd started to hope. That was my mistake. That was the crack in the armor. I'd started to hope that maybe this was how the last chapter of my life was going to go. Not alone, not waiting, but useful. A place where a scared woman could get her feet back under her and a little girl could grow up knowing how to gentle a horse and what the sky does before a storm. I'd started, God help me, to write it in the notebook. Little things. Emmy's tooth came loose. Marlene laughed at supper first time. Biscuit let Emmy sit on his back for a minute. Small entries. the smallest entries I'd made in years, and every one of them was a brick I was laying in a house I had no right to be building. Then the silver truck came up the drive. I was in the yard when I saw it, and I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I knew the way you know a certain set of clouds means the creek's going to flood. It came slow up my gravel, a big new truck, too clean, the kind of clean that means a man who never uses his truck for anything, and it stopped short of the house, and a man got out. He was younger than me, big through the shoulders, good coat, and he had a smile on him, a wide, easy smile, and I disliked him instantly and completely, because I'd learned a long time ago that the men you have to worry about most are the ones who smile before they know if they're welcome. "Afternoon," he called, friendly, too friendly. "Sorry to come up on you like this. I'm looking for somebody. I think she might have come this way." And he held up his phone, and on it was a picture, and even from across the yard I could see it was Marlene, younger in the picture, smiling in the picture, a different woman than the one splitting my wood before whatever had happened to her had happened. "Don't know her," I said. The smile flickered, just a hair. "You sure? Take a closer look. Marlene, she's got a little girl with her, Emmy, my daughter." He let that last word sit there in the cold air between us. My daughter, playing the card he figured would end the conversation. And here is where I have to tell you about the choice, because this is the emotionally heavy part, the part I've turned over more nights than any other, and I still don't know for certain that I chose right. I only know what I chose. Because the thing is, I didn't know this man. He might have been exactly what he said, a father looking for his child. And there is a version of this story where I'm the villain, where I'm the crazy old rancher who kept a man from his daughter, and I've laid awake with that version too. The law was probably on his side. Blood was on his side. Everything easy and clean and defensible was on his side. But I'd seen Marlene's raw knuckles gripping the top of a car window on a 9-degree night. I'd seen her sit up all night with her eyes open because she couldn't let her guard down. I'd heard a 6-year-old tell a donkey she wasn't scared of the dark anymore, which meant there'd been a time she was scared of it plenty, and I'd seen the particular way that child flinched. Once, when I'd raised my hand too fast to swat a fly, the way a dog flinches, the way a thing flinches when it's learned that hands can be a problem. I'm an old man. I've been wrong about a lot, but I have spent 60 years learning to read animals and people, and I trust what I read, and everything I'd read on that ranch for 3 weeks told me one true thing. Those two had run from this exact smiling man, and they had run in canvas shoes in January, which is not something you do to get away from something safe. "Mister," I said, "I don't know you and I don't know her, and there's nobody here but me and my donkey. You're welcome to a cup of coffee before you go, but you're not welcome to stand in my yard and call me a liar." His smile was all the way gone now, and I saw the real thing underneath it, just for a second, the way you see the shape of the rock under still water. Something cold, something that liked to win. "That's her car," he said and pointed, and God help me, I'd forgotten the silver sedan was parked around the side of the barn where Marlene had put it to keep the snow off. The moment stretched. I'm 61. He was maybe 40 and built like a man who worked out for the mirror. If it came to it, I was going to lose. I knew that. And I want to tell you I was brave, but the truth is my heart was going like a rabbit's and my mouth was dry, and the only thing holding me steady was the same stubbornness that keeps me getting up at 5 when every joint I've got votes to stay in bed. "I buy cars at auction," I said. "Fix 'em up, sell 'em. That one's got a bad transmission. You want it, it's $2,000 and it's yours, but the woman you're looking for isn't attached to it." It was a good lie. I was almost proud of it. But he wasn't buying, and he took a step toward the barn, toward the car, toward everything, and I stepped in front of him, this old fool, hip screaming, and that's when the barn door opened. And Marlene came out. I'll never forget it. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. And she could have run out the back into the tree line, taken Emmy and vanished, and part of me screamed for her to do exactly that. But she didn't run. She walked out of that barn and she stood beside me, this woman who trusted nobody, and she put herself in the open in front of the man she'd been running from, and I understood that she was doing the same thing I was doing. She was standing in front of somebody. It's just that the somebody was behind her in the barn, small and holding a currycomb, and Marlene had decided she was done running in front of her daughter. "Go home, Cole," Marlene said. Her voice didn't shake. I don't know how her voice didn't shake. "There's nothing here for you." "There's my kid here for me," he said, and the friendly was all gone and his voice had dropped into something low and familiar and awful, the voice of a man used to that voice working. "Get her. We're going home. We can talk about the rest in the truck." "She's not going anywhere with you." Marlene, a warning, a whole history in one word. And I watched her flinch, just barely, just at the edges, a tiny involuntary thing, and I hated him then with a completeness I hadn't felt for another human being in my whole life. Because I knew that flinch. I'd seen it on Emmy. He'd taught it to both of them. What happened next happened fast, and I've slowed it down 1,000 times in my memory, and it still happens fast. He moved. Toward Marlene or the barn or both fast, that trained, smiling man. And I got a hand on his coat, and he threw me off like I was a screen door, and I went down hard on the frozen gravel and the wind went out of me. And I heard Marlene shout, and I heard Emmy scream from the barn, that high pure terror that goes into you like a nail. And I was on the ground trying to get air and thinking, clear as a bell. So this is how it goes. This is how the good thing ends, on the ground in my own yard, useless. And then I heard the sound. The low one. The one from the chest. The one Biscuit had made exactly 4 times in 11 years. The one that meant something was about to go wrong that you couldn't see coming. Except this time I could see it coming. Because that old gray donkey came out of the open barn door at a dead run, and I have never in my life seen him move like that. A 1,400-pound animal who won't trot to his own supper. And he came across that yard with his ears pinned flat and his teeth bared, and a sound coming out of him like the hinges of hell. And he hit Cole from the side like a freight train made of muscle and spite. The man went down hard, hollering, and Biscuit stood over him, that patient, gentle animal who let a 6-year-old braid flowers into his mane. And he was not patient now, and he was not gentle now. He was fury on 4 legs. Stamping and screaming, and putting himself between that man and the barn where Emmy was. And every time Cole tried to get up, Biscuit drove him back down into the gravel. I got to my feet. I don't know how. Marlene had her arms around Emmy, who'd come running out, and I put myself in front of both of them, and the 4 of us. The woman, the child, the old man, and the donkey. We stood our ground in that cold yard while Cole scrambled backward through the gravel toward his too-clean truck, bleeding from where the frozen ground had opened his cheek. All the smile and all the menace scared clean out of him by an animal that had decided he would not pass. "You're crazy," he was saying, scrambling up into his truck. "You're all crazy. That thing's crazy." "Mister," I said, and my voice was shaking now that it was over. Shaking with everything I hadn't let myself feel while it was happening. "You're right. He's crazy. He's a crazy old donkey, and I've had him 11 years, and he has never once been wrong about a bad thing coming. And if you come up my drive again, he'll be waiting, and next time I won't call him off. Now get gone." He got gone. The silver truck threw gravel all the way down the drive and out onto the road, and we stood there and watched the dust of it settle, and nobody moved for a long time. Then Emmy pulled loose from her mother and ran. Not to me, not to Marlene, but to Biscuit. And she threw her arms around that donkey's neck and buried her face in his mane and sobbed. And the donkey stood there, gentle again, patient again. All the fury drained out of him like it had never been. And he lowered his big head and rested it over the little girl's back like a blanket, like a shield, like a promise. Marlene was crying. I was crying, I'll admit it, 61 years old and crying in my own yard. And she looked at me over Emmy's head, this woman who'd trusted nobody for so long she'd forgotten how, and she said the words she hadn't been able to say the whole 3 weeks, the words underneath all the other words. "Can we stay?" she asked. "Del, please, can we stay?" And I want to tell you I said something wise. Something a wise old rancher would say. But all I could do was nod and keep nodding, because my throat had closed up completely and there weren't any words in me at all. Only the enormous painful warmth of a house coming back to life. Of a life I'd thought was over turning out to have one more chapter in it after all. That was 4 years ago. I want to tell you about the weeks right after, though, because the parking lot and the silver truck were the loud parts, and loud parts are easy to tell. It's the quiet parts that are the real story, and I don't want to skip them just because they don't have a donkey charging across a yard in them. The first thing that happened after Cole left was that nothing happened, and the nothing was the hardest part. Because for 3 days Marlene barely slept, even worse than before, jumping at every truck on the road, standing at the window at 2 in the morning, sure he'd come back. I'd get up, I don't sleep much anyhow, and find her at the glass, and I wouldn't say anything. I'd just make coffee, 2 cups, and set one next to her and take mine to the other chair, and we'd wait out the dark together the way we had that first night. It took a long time for her body to believe what her mind already knew. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting out. Getting out is a moment. Believing you're out is a season. The second thing that happened was Emmy started sleeping with her door open. Just a crack at first, then all the way. And one morning I asked her about it, real casual, mucking a stall next to her, and she said, matter of fact, the way kids drop the heaviest things like they weigh nothing, I don't have to keep it shut anymore because Biscuit would hear. And I had to go check a water line that didn't need checking, so she wouldn't see my face. The third thing, and this is the one I hold on to, is that about a month in, on an ordinary Tuesday, Marlene called me Dad. By accident. She was hollering across the yard for me to grab the far end of a gate, and it just came out, "Dad, get the..." And then she stopped dead, mortified, red to the ears, and started to apologize, and I told her not to. I told her I'd been called worse and never anything better, and that if it slipped out again I wouldn't mind. She never quite said it on purpose after that, but she never took it back either. And Emmy, who missed nothing, started calling me Grandpa Del that same week, loud and constant and delighted, like she'd been saving it up and waiting for permission. So that's the family that got built at the end of my gravel drive. Not a tidy one. Not a legal one, not at first, though we fixed the papers on that in time too. A patched together 3 weeks of terror saved by a donkey kind of family. The best kind, if you ask me. The kind you choose and that chooses you back, standing in a cold yard when it counts. Emmy's 10 now. She's got her own horse, a little bay mare she saved for by working the auction sales with me every weekend, because Marlene raised her to earn things and that pride runs in the family. She still visits Biscuit every single morning. He's getting old, real old, gray going to white now, slow in the mornings. And there are days I catch Emmy standing at his stall a little too quiet. A 10-year-old starting to understand that patient old animals don't live forever. And I don't have anything to say to make that easier, so I just stand next to her, and we look at him together. Marlene runs the ranch now mostly. Runs it better than I ever did. She's still strong, still proud, still can't quite take a compliment. But she sleeps. That's the thing I notice most. She sleeps through the night now, all the way through, and she doesn't sit up with her eyes open. And one time I told her I'd noticed that, and she got quiet, and then she said, "It's the first place I've ever slept where I wasn't listening for the door." And then she went and split some wood, because that's how she is. And I let her because that's how I am. Cole never came back. I heard later, through the long, slow grapevine of a rural county, that there'd been trouble that finally caught up with him elsewhere, that the law had gotten hold of things it should have gotten hold of long before, and that Marlene and Emmy were safe in a way that had papers behind it now, official and permanent. I don't know all the details. I don't want to. Some things you don't have to write down to keep, and some things you're glad you never learned. I still keep the notebook. Feed store 3 for $1. I still write down the weather and the rotting fence posts, but the entries are different now. Emmy lost her last baby tooth. Marlene laughed so hard at supper she cried. Biscuit slow this morning but ate good. Small entries, the smallest entries, each one a brick in a house I had no right to build and got to keep anyway. People ask me when they hear the story, why a donkey? Why not a dog? Why not a horse? Why not some ordinary thing? And I tell them the truth, which is that I don't know. I don't know why it was Biscuit standing in that trailer 11 years ago refusing to take one more step. I don't know what he sensed at that gas station, or how, or whether my wife was right about the wire running straight from God into his ribs. I'm too old and too plain to have a theory. I've thought sometimes about the version of that night where I won the argument with him, where I was just tired enough, just cold enough, just closed off enough, to say no to a donkey and drive home alone. That version exists somewhere, I figure. A version where a silver sedan stayed a silver sedan, where a little girl in canvas shoes was just a shape in a fogged window I never rolled my own window down to see. I don't like to sit in that version long. But I go there once in a while on purpose because it reminds me how thin the good ending was, how close I came to being one more set of headlights. It keeps me honest. It keeps me stopping now when I see a car parked out past the pumps where the light gives out. I stop every time now. Most of the time it's nothing. But I stop because one time it wasn't, and I'll never forget the arithmetic of what almost drove past. All I know is that on the coldest night of a hard winter, an animal that had no reason to care about a stranger in a frozen car cared anyway, and wouldn't let me leave, and everything good in the last 4 years of my life came from that one stubborn refusal. I've stopped trying to explain it. Some kinds of grace you just say thank you for. Last week, Emmy asked me if she could have the notebook when I'm gone. I asked her what she wanted with an old man's list of fence posts and weather. She said, real serious, the way she's serious about everything, because it's got us in it. The whole time we've been here. It's the only place the whole thing is written down. I gave it to her right then. Didn't wait to be gone. Told her to keep it going, to write down her own small things, the weather and the horses and whatever's warm and whatever's breaking, because that's all a life is, really. A list of small things you loved and tried to keep. She's out at the barn right now as I write this last part. I can see her through the kitchen window, 10 years old, standing at the rail in the early light, telling an old white donkey everything, the way she has every morning for 4 years. His ears are turned toward her the way they always are, patient, listening. I don't know how many more mornings he's got in him. I don't let myself think about it too hard. But I know that when it comes, that little girl who was once so cold, who once had nowhere on this whole earth to go, will stand at that rail and say goodbye to the animal that ran across a frozen yard to save her, and she will not be scared of the dark, because he taught her not to be. And I think that's about the best any of us can do for each other in the end. Teach somebody not to be scared of the dark. And then, when it's your turn, trust that they learned it well enough to face their own. That's the whole story. That's how a single mom with nowhere to go found her way to a ranch at the end of a gravel drive, on the strength of an old man too tired to drive past and a donkey too stubborn to leave. The sun's coming up over the ridge now. Emmy's laughing at something. I should go help with the feeding.